So greetings, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Adler. I am the Chief Chocophile of Chocolopolis. Welcome to our adventures in chocolate. I'm very excited to have one of my closest friends, Dr. Kristy Leissle, here joining me tonight. She's actually in Seattle tonight. She's usually in Ghana. We are not in the same location at the moment, but we will be in a few hours. So we're still doing this virtually, but it's very good to have her back. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kristy Leissle. Kristy and I go way back. I think we met, it was like 2007, so a long time. If you're familiar with Theo Chocolate, they were doing a chocolate university. And this was before I had opened Chocolopolis. And I went, I think it was like 3 or 4 days in a row, and they had all these speakers, and Kristy was my favorite. And so as a present to myself, when I had Chocolopolis that first year, I invited her to come speak to our customers. And the rest is history. We've been really good friends ever since. I think we joke that we can get together and we can't talk for less than 2 hours. So let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and Kristy's going to talk about herself.
Yes, thank you so much, Lauren. And
hang on one sec here. Let me get the.
No, it's so much fun to think about, like when we first met, because it was so long ago now, and it was sort of the beginnings of chocolate, even here in Seattle. Like it was really early days for all of us, I think. So I'm so grateful that we were able to meet when we did and be on this journey together.
So tell us about yourself, Kristy.
Oh, thank you. So
can you see the slide okay?
Yeah, I can see the slide. I'm just changing my my view so I can see some folks too while we chat. So yeah, so I'm Dr. Kristy Leissle, and I know some of you here today. I can see some familiar faces on the screens and some familiar names if you're not on video, and a few people I've even seen in the last few days here in person in Seattle, which is so wonderful. It's, as Lauren said, I live in Ghana in West Africa, so I've been there for just over 3 years now, but I am back in Seattle for a few days visiting dear friends and catching up after the many months when I was unable to travel back to the US. I am a researcher and writer on cocoa and chocolate, and I've been doing this for about 16 years. I got my PhD by studying chocolate at the University of Washington. I studied the trade between Ghana and Britain for my PhD dissertation, and I've really kept up my focus on West African trade and political economy. It's the primary area where I work, and the primary part of the cocoa and chocolate world that I write about is West African region, and especially Ghana, where I live. A few years ago, right when I was moving to Ghana, in fact, my first book came out, which you can see the cover here. It's called Very Simply Cocoa, and it is a simple title, which is for a complex topic. And the task for this particular book it's part of a series called Resources, which is published by Polity. And the Resources series deals with the geopolitics of various resources. So I was asked to write on the geopolitics of cocoa. So that's what this book is about. And really, if you're going to talk about historical geopolitics, you would be writing mainly about Central and South America. But now, contemporary times, to write effectively about the geopolitics of cocoa, you really need to write about Ghana and Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast being the top producer of cocoa in the world, and Ghana being number 2. And Nigeria and Cameroon, also big producers in the West African region. So cocoa really dives into the politics of the industry with a focus on West Africa and what those politics mean for different people working in different parts of the cocoa and chocolate industries, from farmers all the way to the CEOs of multinationals. So I did my best with it. And now I've continued to write around similar topics. On the right-hand side, you can see my website, Doc of Choc. I'm always Doc of Choc on Twitter and Instagram, and my website, docofchoc.com. And there I continue to make freely available my other publications as I'm able to, which do tend to deal with issues of politics and economics, but also the cultures of cocoa and chocolate. So I was really, really excited when Lauren asked me if I wanted to participate in a tasting with her, because it's very rare that I get to do tastings of Ghana bars only. So we can talk about that if you'd like today. And we've got our 3 Ghana cocoa bars, one of which is made in Ghana as well. So it's very, very exciting for me to be able to do this.
Well, and Kristy, we have a range of knowledge on the event today. So we've got people who are experts. We have people who this might be their first chocolate tasting. So maybe you could set the stage in terms of, you know, you kind of mentioned how Ghana and Ivory Coast sit in the world of cacao and chocolate, but maybe you could give a little bit more context around bulk market versus fine flavor, just to set it up a little bit better for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, you know, most cocoa in the world is grown in the West African region. And if we take Africa as a whole, it's about almost 3/4 of all cocoa. And about 70% of that is from those 4 countries in West Africa that I mentioned. When you're talking about volumes of that size, you know, I mean, basically 3/4 of all cocoa grown in the world, we're really talking about the bulk cocoa industry. When beans are bulked, they are blended together from different countries, from different places within the same country, and they're traded as a commodity good. So they're traded typically at the world market price. There is in Ghana, because Ghana has very high quality beans because of their very good post-harvest practices, and that's the fermentation and drying of the cocoa beans. Ghana beans trade at a premium for that reason, but they're pretty much all African cocoa, and certainly all West African cocoa ends up on the bulk market and traded as commodity cocoa, which ends up really feeding the chocolate industry globally. So we can think about chocolate bars and chocolate confectionery, all of the major multinational brands like Nestle and Hershey's, and the consumer facing ones like those, and even the ones that we might not necessarily hear about as consumers, but that really feed the chocolate confectionery industry, like Barry Callebaut. These things like ice creams and brownies and cake mixes and just, you know, a chocolate croissant, anything that you can imagine with a chocolate flavor, tends to be made from bulk beans. And so again, within bulk, there are variations, and Ghana being the superior of the bulk grade cocoa. And then there's another segment of the market that's much, much smaller, that is more typically cocoa from Central and South America and parts of Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific, tend more to be categorized as what we would call fine flavor or specialty cocoa. And the trading terms around those beans that are categorized in this way as fine or specialty, the trading terms do tend to be different. The pricing is different. The relationship between buyer and seller can be a little bit different, in many ways more intimate, and sometimes, I don't want to say more long-term, because if we look at, you know, Nestle, Cadbury, I mean, these companies have been around for like over 100 years. So they also have long-term buying relationships. But in the specialty or fine chocolate industry, there tends to be a little bit more upfront knowledge of between the buyer and the seller of who they are and how they practice. So in Ghana, like I said, we tend to be dealing with bulk beans, but we are dealing with a superior grade of bulk beans, which do have a premium attached to them. The flavor of Ghana globally is recognized as the flavor of chocolate, and that's an important point. And so many of the large companies whose brands we enjoy even today built these brands at the turn of the 20th century by importing Ghana cocoa. So the flavor of Ghana beans in particular tends to be classified as what we all would say is chocolate. You can have profiles from other parts of the world where the cocoa is very nutty, where it's very floral, where it's very fruity. Ghana tends to be pretty baseline chocolate flavor. And so it's often used as a gauge, you know, for that baseline chocolate experience. And then other fine flavor beans may be even measured in contrast to it. So that's why it's also very exciting today, because we don't often do Ghana bean tastings or Ghana chocolate tastings. So we can have some experience today of how the Ghana flavors come through as chocolate bars.
And we will start our tasting in just a moment, but let me have Kristy also tell you about her series on confectionarynews.com.
Yeah, so thanks, Lauren, for this, because this is really something I've been working on since I moved to Ghana. And again, I've been in and out of Ghana for many years, but living there full time since 2018 gave me an opportunity to really write about cocoa farmers in a way that I felt was maybe more revealing and certainly more individualized than some of the work I'd done before and some of the work that I'd seen in other contexts. So I had proposed a series a few years ago to Confectionery News, which is a major outlet for industry information. And the editor, Tony Myers, he was enthusiastic about the series. I'm very grateful to him for that, because what I basically pitched was profiles of farmers throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And as and when I'm able to go and conduct lengthy interviews with individual men and women who farm cocoa for a living, I publish one in these series called I Am a Cocoa Farmer. And really my goal was to kind of show cocoa farmers as individual human beings. We tend to write about cocoa farmers, especially in West Africa, in newspapers or magazines, or even on the news, certainly in people's blogs or social media. We tend to kind of homogenize cocoa farmers in West Africa and sort of treat them all as if they're the same, generally very poor or exploited. And while that's often true, there's each one of them is a human being with their own life story and their own relationship with cocoa. So this is the most recent of the series. In I Am a Cocoa Farmer, Daniel Aboje, and he's a farmer in the western region of Ghana, which is the largest cocoa growing area in the country. And I just delve into, the facts of these people's lives. What brought you to cocoa? How is cocoa working out for you? How well do you do? What are your challenges? What are your opportunities? So it's a nice series if you're interested to see farmers from a kind of individualized perspective.
I think one of the things I really enjoyed about at least one of those articles was you really did the math, like from a cocoa farmer's perspective, like how, so really thinking through what's my income statement as a small cocoa farmer. And I think, really having that, as you said, you're not lumping the cocoa farmers as a whole and giving some, country-based balance sheet or income statement. You were doing kind of, here's what he pays for, here's what he makes, here's what he pays for things. And it was really, really instructive.
So, I ask the same questions to every farmer that I interview. It's the same. And I'm really focused on price, like what price do you get, and income, right? And so I like to be able to kind of paint this picture of individual livelihood, for every farmer in the series.
So just as background, I went to visit Kristy in Ghana. My husband, Mark, and I did. I went to visit Kristy and Gavin in Ghana in July of 2019. It was an incredible experience. Kristy has lived and done research in Ghana for many years, but for me, it was my first experience in Africa and my first experience in an African cocoa growing country. So what we thought we'd do tonight is, and before we keep going, we are going to taste a chocolate, but what we thought we'd do is kind of show you some slides, and I can give you kind of the newbie perspective of things I noticed just about the country and the culture and what it was like talking to these cocoa farmers. And then Kristy can give us kind of the expert or deeper dive perspective of someone who has been doing this for some time. But before we move on, let's start our tasting. So some of you have joined us for tastings before, others have not. So I'm going to walk us through a tasting and then we'll continue on. So the first bar we're going to taste is this one by Letterpress Chocolate. If you have the chocolate, don't put it in your mouth yet. Everybody who ordered chocolate should have a tasting card and a flavor wheel. And I like to remind people that, there's no standards in chocolate. So unlike wine, where, you might study to become a sommelier, or coffee, where you might study to become a certified Q grader, chocolate has no standards right now. They're working on them. And as some of you may have heard me say, it's very political. So who knows when we'll have a standard, but we don't. So any flavor you taste is right. There's no wrong answers. And flavor is very personal. So just because something tastes like one thing to you and something else to me doesn't mean that you're wrong and I'm right, or vice versa. It just means that we have different tasting palates and vocabulary. So this flavor wheel is just meant to be kind of a fun tool. If the chocolate's reminding you of something and you can't think of what it is, sometimes, I'll look at this and it'll I'll think, oh, right, it tastes like,
Yeah.
green grass or something like that. And we're not gonna ask for anybody for feedback. So, but if you do have comments as we're tasting, feel free to put them in chat. We get some lively chat dialogues going, and that's really nice. And then this card will, when we're not here with you, it will remind you how to taste chocolate. So let's open our letterpress. And the reason I'm starting with this is, we do a lot of all dark chocolate tastings, but what's cool about tonight is Kristy chose most of these bars, and she wanted to have a dark milk and a white that has a very interesting ingredient. So tonight we actually have some kind of a variety of bars, which is really fun. But I always like to start with the highest percent chocolate and work my way down to the lower percentages. So the higher the percent, the darker the chocolate. The percentage doesn't tell you anything about quality. It just tells you approximately how sweet the bar is. So for example, this Ghana bar, this letterpress Ghana bar is a 70%. So 70% of it comes from the cocoa bean, and the remaining 30% is mostly going to be sugar. So go ahead, open your bar up, break off a small piece, maybe like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, or maybe it's not square. And you want to use all 5 senses when you're tasting chocolate. So the first thing you want to do is look at the chocolate, okay? You don't want it to look like this. If you can see that, that's called bloom. That is when in this case, the chocolate has been exposed to heat. And so it gets this kind of chalky texture. It's, you can still eat it, but it's going to have a strange texture. It might not be quite as lovely and flavorful. It's not going to be the same experience. Okay, then you want to feel it. It should feel reasonably smooth. This one, the only thing about letterpress is they use a very detailed mold when they mold the bars of chocolate. And so the mold has some texture to it. So you may feel that, but if you feel the back of it, it's quite smooth. Then you want to break it in half, and you want to hear a nice snap sound. That means it's in temper, and it just confirms that it is not like this. It's a quick way. If you want to do more tasting, come to one of our tasting classes, but this is the short version. Rub it between your fingers under your nose and take small sniffs, because your sense of smell is an important part of your sense of taste, right? Okay, somebody just told me they can only see the opening slide. Okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Brennan. If you were to hold your nose and taste, the only thing you would notice would be tongue tastes, which are bitter, sweet, salty, sour, and umami. So it's your sense of smell and all that's going to pick up the molecules of the other flavor. So go ahead, put it in your mouth. Don't chew. Just let it melt, but move it all around the inside of your mouth. And as it's melting, what you want to think about is, does it taste the same from the beginning to the middle to the end? Or do you notice the flavors changing as it melts? So is it kind of a one-note chocolate, or are you getting many different flavors? What's the texture like? Is it smooth and creamy? Is it sticky or gritty? So I'm going to go ahead and taste. And I see we've got Sarah loves the packaging. And I see Diana's noticing that on the packaging here, there's a good quote by Benjamin Franklin on the inside flap. And Jeff Adler, my cousin, says the taste of this is evolving and has been smooth the whole time. Yeah. Just a reminder what Kristy was talking about, where Ghana is kind of what people often think of as chocolatey. What's interesting for me is, most of what I do is in the fine flavor segment of the chocolate world, which represents about 8 to 10% of the world's production. It's not really West Africa. With that said, as Kristy said, Ghana is known for quality. And one of the things that was interesting to me is when we were visiting the farmers, they were so proud of their quality, but quality is defined differently by everybody. And for West Africa, they have very set protocols, I believe. And when we get to this, Kristy can talk about it later, for fermentation and for how they're processing the cacao that results in what would be considered quality for West Africa. Feel free to keep putting comments about the chocolate in the chat, and we'll check in. So let's go back to the Cocopreneurship Institute. So I was fortunate the first night I was there. Kristy, did you want to say something about letterpress?
I did, yeah. Just before we go to Cocopreneurship, I just wanted to point out to folks, I mean, letterpress is amazing chocolate. I love their chocolate. I feel so grateful that we can try this now. I think their molds are some of the most intricate and beautiful in the craft chocolate segment, and of course their packaging as well. And if you see on the front of the package, for those of you who are doing the tasting, there's this word Ashanti in the middle of the packaging above Ghana. So I wanted to point out what that word is. So Ashanti is both a region within Ghana. It's sort of in the middle of the country. The capital of the Ashanti region is Kumasi. I lived in Kumasi for a time when I was doing my PhD research. So the Ashanti region is also one that has been home to me for part of my life. And Ashanti also refers to the people. Ghana has many, many, many different ethnic groups, some of whom share a language kind of base, and some of which don't. The Ashanti group is part of the dominant linguistic, ethno-linguistic group in Ghana, which are called the Akan people. And for us, the Ashanti region is important because cocoa first arrived in Ghana in the eastern region. And that was the first place where cocoa was planted on a commercial scale, and people really adopted it enthusiastically. And then there was some issues with disease. And after Eastern region kind of fell off in its production, the Ashanti region became very, very powerful in its cocoa production. The Ashanti kingdom was a very powerful kingdom within what is now called Ghana. And the Ashanti people, to make a generalization, have been historically very good traders. And so when the Ashanti people adopted cocoa, it really kind of pushed what is now called Ghana. Back in the colonial times, it was called the Gold Coast. But the Ashanti people really helped push Ghana into its position of prominence in cocoa production. And so this letterpress bar is really an acknowledgement of that history in that one word, Ashanti.
And I will say, I mean, this is, from my perspective, this is a fabulous bar of chocolate. And I mean, particularly for Ghana, like I get some nice nut notes. I see Edward says that the aroma to him is very much chocolate baked goods, kind of in fitting with what Kristy was saying. The taste is quite mild, but then I usually prefer much darker chocolate. So that was Edward. But yeah, I mean, to me, this is a beautiful bar of chocolate. Absolutely beautifully done. And this is a chocolate maker in Los Angeles. So they're using cacao from Ghana, but they are making the chocolate in America. And we can talk more about that as we go along. All right, so let's go to the Cocopreneurship Institute. So I was fortunate to be the first night we arrived, Kristy launched this. So go ahead, Kristy.
Yeah, it was really, really cool that you were there right when CIG launched. Cocopreneurship Institute of Ghana is a long title for an NGO, so we call it CIG. And so my co-founder, Mutia Merheb, you can see her standing to the left of me, wearing a black dress and a white purse. And Mutia has been living in Ghana for more than 25 years. She has been, she's run several businesses. She's served on the boards of various NGOs. When I came to Ghana, I had the idea, the place where I live, we're actually in my apartment complex right now. That's not my apartment, that's a public space within the apartment. But there was quite a bit of activity there. There was lots of exercise classes and book clubs and, people coming for yoga and all sorts of things. And so I thought, when I moved there, I thought, this is a really nice audience that maybe would be interested in a series of chocolate tasting classes. And so I didn't know Mutia at all. I spoke to the manager of the kind of events area. His name is Bright. I spoke to Bright about the possibility of me leading a series of chocolate tasting classes. And I lived up on the fifth floor of this apartment building. And by the time I'd spoken to Bright on the ground floor about my idea of just hosting a few chocolate tasting classes and arrived back up at my fifth floor apartment, he'd already called Mutia, and who runs this event center. That's one of her businesses. And she'd already called me. So it was like within the space of 5 minutes. Mutia called me and was so moved by this idea of doing something around chocolate, having known that Ghana, her home country, is really a prominent cocoa producer, was so moved by the idea of bringing some kind of chocolate education into her events company, that we ended up talking very quickly after that and coming up with this idea for an NGO that would support people working in value addition in cocoa in Ghana and across West Africa. And so it all happened so fast. But Mutia's enthusiasm and her vision, and my own experience with cocoa came together in like a wonderful marriage of energies and ideas. And we launched the Cocopreneurship Institute of Ghana quite quickly after that. We'd already been doing events and trainings and things already for some time by the time we officially launched, when Lauren and Mark were there. But basically, we decided to be responsive to the market, to only run programming and projects that were directly filling a need or a request within the cocoa and chocolate communities in West Africa. And that might be from cocoa farming communities. So for example, just before I traveled to the US, Mutia and I went up to a cocoa farming community that we work with who were in need of water. They had no accessible clean water source. So CIG was able to secure funding through a donor to dig a borehole for them, which is like a well, and to pump to clean fresh water for that community. So we work on the cocoa side of things, but we primarily work on the chocolate side of things because, as we've been saying, cocoa is a major agricultural export from West Africa. And certainly Ghana and its neighbor Ivory Coast have almost exclusively exported the cocoa beans. They have tended historically not to keep cocoa in the country and process it into anything that consumers would want to use. So they've really lost a lot of value of the cocoa by exporting it really as a raw good, a raw material. The cocoa is not raw, but it's a raw material for producing chocolate. So now I would say in the past 5 to 10 years, a number of artisans and small businesses have started to fill that void of value addition in Ghana and really right across West Africa. Not all of them do chocolate, but some of them do chocolate. And we're lucky enough to have, I think is our last chocolate tasting today, one of these chocolate bar by one of these artisans, 57 Chocolate. But CIG's reason for existence is to support these entrepreneurs. Again, they might be on the cocoa side, but more often we work on the chocolate or value added side to support their needs. And so they've got many, many needs. It's a young industry. It doesn't have the kind of infrastructural or logistical or even historical supports that we have in Europe and North America around chocolate. So CIG is, responsive and a kind of listening-based organization where we work with these entrepreneurs. So that's been a lot of fun. And we'll get to taste again one of the products of these new artisans.
We're saving that one for last.
Yeah, that's our last one.
So we had a.
So
all right. So I thought what I do is these are obviously photos taken, and that's me and Kristy in Accra, the major city. We were actually in a parking lot, and there were a couple of cacao trees that Kristy knew about. So we went and had someone help us bring a pod down. So that was my first cocoa pod in Ghana.
But let me just add here, Lauren, that cocoa, these are the only 2 cocoa trees that I know of in Accra. So like cocoa doesn't grow in Accra. Like I only happen to know about these because they're at the Guinness brewery site and my husband worked for Guinness Ghana. And so I just happened to know that Guinness had these ancient trees. I mean, the trees are very old, but it is not common to see cocoa trees in the city. It's obviously a rural activity to grow cocoa. So Lauren's experience with cocoa in Ghana as a first time was very unusual to see like urban cocoa.
I included this photo because I thought it was interesting. It actually shows the plethora of flowers on the tree before they've been pollinated. And it just, I've seen trees like other places where you might get a few little tiny flowers, but I thought this was a really nice example of like how flowerful, if that's a word, the tree could be.
And
so this is actually, oh, go ahead, Kristy.
They're called cushions. Those when they bunch up like that, because they look like a cushion of flowers. And again, these are old trees, so they're producing many cushions for very, 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 very many years.
They're hardy city dwelling trees.
Yep.
So this was actually the view out of Kristy's balcony, and what I found interesting is you saw the common room where her event was, and it was a 5-story apartment building, very nice. but you look out and this was a cassava farm, like literally right below. And then on the other side is a piece of unfinished construction. And I thought Kristy could talk a little bit more about what resulted in these two very unique things right outside of her window.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of kind of generational wealth in Ghana. And so families will own these large pieces of land, even in Accra, and either develop them or not over even sometimes generations as they are able to and also interested in. And so that cassava plat that you saw in the other one, since there was a few families, you can see those little structures. There were a few families living in those little dwellings, and they probably had, like service jobs or something, maybe they drove a motorcycle or a taxi, or I mean, maybe they even went to an office job or a retail job, who knows? But the point is, they were probably squatters in those little houses. And they actually, since this picture was taken, the family have evicted them, and that cassava was all bulldozed. And so you see this happen over time, where families might have wealth for generations in the form of land and don't always develop it. And then there comes a day when someone gets enthusiastic and decides to do something about it, and then you see the land use change. That building is a good example. That building has been, I call it the Space Needle, because it reminds me that circular thing of the Space Needle here in Seattle, but it's been like that since I moved to Accra. And it was probably like that long before, and it's still like that now. So it's a good example of, like, someone started to do something with this wealth and then just stopped for one reason or another. And now we have this kind of empty building there. But, the other thing just to note about Accra, and I think it's true of a lot of places in Ghana, is even the city itself, while it is very urban, the built environment is really present and visible. We've got skyscrapers, we have, office buildings, we have paved roads. We also have farmland, in the city, and many unpaved roads. And, infrastructure is not always 100% developed. Like, we have open sewers on the sides of most streets. The sewage system is not what we might experience here in the US or in Europe. So it's really a city of contrasts. And these two pictures do a really nice job of showing that.
And I thought, one of the interesting things was when you're at a stoplight or a toll plaza on the highway, everybody's selling everything. And I've got a few more pictures, but here's somebody with the daily newspapers with a quite sensational headline there: Nigerian family fights over dead body in Accra. But I thought this was very kind of perfect. You see over on the right, there's a lady with a bakery case on her head with pastries, and then you've got somebody with some kind of fruit, and then another guy selling pillows. And Stanley, the driver, one day needed a cell phone card. So, we were at a stoplight and he waved someone over and bought a cell phone card. So that's kind of like a lot of commerce gets done at stoplights and in traffic, which was kind of fascinating.
For me, this is an everyday view. This is my everyday in Ghana. And so I do have a driver who, if I need to drive out of Accra and go into the bush, certainly where I wouldn't be comfortable driving my car, Stanley does drive me. But in my day-to-day in Accra, I drive myself around, and this is what it looks like for me every single day. And so, like Lauren said, you can buy literally anything through the car window. Water is very common. Bread is really something that people would buy. Fruits, ground nuts are very popular. There's the women, ground nuts like a peanut, and they shell them, and the women wear a tray on their head, and they build a slope of ground nuts, but one side of the slope is always, because they're pulling the ground nuts off, and they sort of form this incredible slope that's always perfectly balanced, and not a single ground nut ever falls off onto the ground. So it's quite an extraordinary feat of posture, really.
So taxi stand. Okay, so now, so let me just give some more context. So Kristy and I then were taking a trip into the bush to visit this cocoa farming community, and we have to thank CARE, the nonprofit CARE, who made this day possible for us. And the area was called Asarekwa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Kristy. Mm-hmm. So I thought just to give a little more context. So the green here is Ghana, okay? And you'll see to the left is Cote d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast. And as Kristy said, the Ivory Coast and Ghana together produce approximately 60% of the world's bulk market commodity cacao. And then you can see to the right of Ghana is Togo and Benin, and above Ghana is Burkina Faso. And then you've got Mali, Niger, and Nigeria, just to give a sense. And for those of you who are cacao people, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Sao Tome, another big cacao or nice cacao producer, is this little teeny island out here. And then within Ghana, it was interesting because one of the fascinating things to me was when we were driving there, my husband Mark and I had gone to Cape Coast Castle a day before, which you also had to drive in the same direction. And that was one of the major slave trading castles. And so we had done that. And so we were heading in the same direction to go to Asarekwa. But somebody said to me, oh, but you turn right at Winneba Junction. And the funny thing was when anybody in Accra asked me where we'd been, and I said, well, you know, we went to this farming community, we turned right at Winneba Junction, and everybody knew where we were headed in general. So that was kind of how you got around and gave directions. This was Abraham, our driver. We were in a very nice four-wheel drive. What was interesting to me was the wealthiest people, like the Lamborghini of Ghana was like the Toyota Land Cruiser. The wealthy, the politicians, they all had Toyota Land Cruisers, like really nice ones. This was a more appropriate four-wheel drive for a nonprofit like CARE. So it was not a Toyota Land Cruiser, but it was still a very nice one. And when you get farther out into the bush where you're running into the dirt roads with the potholes that are like, 2 feet deep, you understand why they have four-wheel drive. So I was sitting in the back seat, and this was just pictures out the window as we were driving. We did pass, I'm assuming, a field extension office for the cocoa bod. And Kristy, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about what the cocoa bod is and maybe how that plays into quality. Like, you said Ghana has quality, and it's not considered fine flavor cacao, but within the bulk market commodity world, it is considered quality. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the role that cocoa bod plays in that.
Yeah, and so Cocobot is Ghana Cocoa Board, and it's abbreviated as Cocobot. I tend to say Ghana Cocoa Board, and it is Cocoa Board has been around in some version for more than half a century, well over half a century, since including during colonial times when Ghana was the Gold Coast colonized by Britain, and so Cocoa Board's function is to regulate the industry and to ensure best practices along the supply chain, including that fermentation and drying that we were talking about, that in Ghana and Ivory Coast and Nigeria and Cameroon, farmers do themselves on the farms. And so if you have familiarity with fine flavor cocoa or specialty cocoa, especially from Central and South America, cocoa is usually purchased raw from the farmers and fermented and dried in a central facility, a central fermentary, but the farmers in West Africa do it themselves. And so in Ghana, the official estimate is there are 800,000 cocoa farmers. It's probably more than that. But that's 800,000 people who need to know how to do fermentation and drying, who need to know how to harvest at the right time, who need to know how to plant properly, to maximize yields and the health of the cocoa tree and the surrounding environment. So that's what Cocoa Board does. Cocoa Board's reputation is, let's say it's very well known certainly in Africa. Politically, it's one of the more powerful institutions in sub-Saharan Africa. It regulates the trade very, very tightly in Ghana. Cocoa Board has probably the tightest regulations of any cocoa regulator in the industry. Among the large players, there's some very tiny players like Grenada, for example, where there's also a Cocoa Board that runs a pretty tight ship. But of the large producers, Cocoa Board in Ghana has quite a bit of power. So they have historically focused on quality. They have an excellent quality control division that monitors and grades the beans several times between farm and port. They have agricultural extension officers and field officers that are constantly in the field with farmers, sharing best practices, sharing treatments for the various diseases that plague cocoa in Ghana. They regulate very tightly any inputs that are used, like fertilizers or pesticides in cocoa farming. And of course, they control the export of cocoa. So the way the industry is structured in Ghana is the domestic purchasing. So the people who actually go and buy cocoa from farmers and give them cash for their cocoa, that is a competitive market. There's about a dozen, let's say, they're called licensed buying companies. You have to have a license to buy cocoa within Ghana. Let's say about a dozen companies with significant market share. They are private companies. There's one government-run company. There's a few that are cooperatives owned by their members, and they all are required to sell the cocoa to Ghana Cocoa Board, which then markets it to international buyers. So that's a kind of brief sketch of the industry, but it's all to say that Cocoa Board is very powerful. We have a very, very, very highly regulated industry in Ghana with lots of rules and regulations, some of which could bear a little bit of freeing up, and many of which have proved to be a boon for cocoa farmers, really, and given them a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill, a lot of expertise, and some protections that farmers don't have in other parts of the world.
Hey, Kristy, while we're on the topic, Kathy Wakefield is asking what cocoa bean quality factors does the Cocoa Board monitor?
The same, like they look for the same defects that you would maybe be familiar with if anyone is familiar with cut tests and the way you cut open a cocoa bean to examine how, what it looks like from the inside. But the 3 or 4 that they primarily look for are the weight of the bean. So they take samples of every single bag, and they weigh them to see, how large or small the beans are, how many beans are in 100 grams. The fewer the beans, the larger each bean is. And that's really important because we have 2 crops in Ghana, 2 categories of cocoa, main crop and light crop. So main crop is October, November, December. That's the main cocoa growing season. That is the larger beans. They're like plumper. There's more of them. Those are main crop beans are export quality. They're considered export quality. Light crop beans come more like May, June, July, and during the rainy season. And the beans are actually smaller. There's fewer beans. And if you're categorized as light crop beans, then they're not of export quality. The seasons a little bit run into each other. So you can get some light crop beans during main season and vice versa. So, they're looking primarily in the first instance for that weight to designate as main crop, light crop. They look for mold. They look for signs of like pests or disease residue. And then they do a cut test where they cut open the bean and they look for the visual signs of high quality fermentation. So it's very similar to what you would see in other contexts, with maybe the exception of main crop, light crop. I don't know if that exists in other places.
Okay, just some more photos as we go through. So we arrived in the village, and unfortunately I wasn't able to take pictures as we were coming in and first arriving, because the first thing we had to do was go meet the village elders in the community center, which you'll see later, which literally was 4 poles and a corrugated metal top. That was the community center. But we had to meet with them, introduce ourselves, and then we had to ask for permission to take photos. And so it wasn't until we got that permission that we could take photos. And for me, this was like an amazing experience. Kristy and I sat down and I'm thinking, oh man, Kristy's been doing this for years. She's like the researcher, she's met with villages before, and we each had to introduce ourselves to them and we had to tell them why we were there. So Kristy was talking about, I'm a researcher and here's what I do. And I'm thinking, wow, what am I going to say? So I just said, I sell chocolate to consumers in America and they all want to know what your story is. And I'm hopeful, I want to hear your story so I can take it back and tell them about it. And they all started clapping, and I still get teary-eyed. I almost started crying. I was like, these are these wonderful people who, they have a really hard life. You can see from this photo, we were walking in between 2 communities. And when I say 2 communities, they were like maybe 100 yards apart. So it wasn't very far, but you can see that this is, a very difficult life, honestly. And they are just so proud and so wonderful. So this was the first family we spoke to, and I'll let Kristy take it from here, but Abdul Razak, who's the second man from the right, was the farmer, and that was his wife, and 2 children, the younger people there, who we spent the first hour and a half with. I think the care people were like, okay, we scheduled a half an hour, but he was just this amazing man who was such a good businessman and had so many interesting things to share. And I have a few thoughts, but Kristy, that like as the newbie, things that were interesting to me, but I thought maybe if there's some things you want to share about Abdul Razak first.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to what you were saying a moment ago, Lauren, about having to meet the chiefs and everything. I mean, that's I do that in every research, almost every research context where I work. It's really common. The chief system, which existed, across Africa, long before colonialism, has remained very, very strong in West Africa, and so we have obviously a federal government and federal judiciary and like national laws in Ghana, and they are enforced, but there's a parallel system alongside that, which is the traditional chieftaincies. And so if you're, and I'm not even going to say if you're living in a village, because they're very powerful in the urban center as well, centers as well. Like you typically also bring grievances to chiefs. They're arbiters of disputes. They are the major landholders. And so in one way or another, the chiefs always have say over land. Even if they have sold it to someone, they may still be able to have a say in what happens on that land. So they're extremely important, and you have to really acknowledge their leadership and power when you enter into a community and want to do anything of significance. So I am kind of constantly meeting with chiefs when I'm in a new location, and we had to do that on the day, but it can be very intimidating if you even for me still. But yeah, Abdul Razak, it was amazing to meet him. I've met many cocoa farmers. I mean, I've met many cocoa farmers over the years and had a chance to spend time, more or less with lots of them. But meeting Abdul Razak was very, very special, because right away I could just sort of see just a spark in his eyes of I knew I was dealing with someone who was very savvy about his job, who was really committed and dynamic and enthusiastic, and a real leader. And since that first visit with Lauren, I've been back to continue to get to know Abdul Razak and his family, and to do some more research there. And it was really an extraordinary experience. You kind of knew right away, or at least I did, that we had met a real leader among cocoa farmers, and that it was really important to listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, I think, again, just as sort of the newbie in this, it was interesting because his crop, and Kristy, feel free to jump in at any point, he was calling it Amazonia, but I think it was like an Amazonas or type pod that probably would have come from South America at some point. But the cocoa bod had given them a new hybrid that was more productive. And so it was interesting because we asked him, he was quite straightforward, actually. We asked him, how he felt about the new hybrid. And he said, well, the cocoa bod are the experts, and I trust the research they've done. But the interesting thing was, he said, with the hybrid, he might, 1 acre would get him 5 bags of cocoa, whereas with the older varietals, it would only get him 4 bags of cocoa. But then upon pressing him, he said that the older variety, even though it was only 4 bags of cocoa, it actually weighed more than the bags of the new variety. So he would get paid more for the old variety. So, it was really interesting things like that from him. As somebody who had never been through this before, we were asking him, the thing he kept bringing up were things like inputs, so fertilizer and pesticide. And, as someone who works with consumers who tend to want very healthy things, you think, oh no, I don't want to eat this chocolate. But the reality is it's the fertilizer and the pesticides that keep him in business as a very small subsistence farmer. And he was saying that, years ago or previously, they would spray the pesticides, I think, and use the fertilizer like twice a year. And I think the cocoa bod was doing once. And now it had gotten to the point where the land wasn't productive enough, and he needed to actually spray pesticides and use fertilizer once a month. So 1, the cocoa bod was no longer providing that much. And 2, in order to buy any of those things, he had to go 10 kilometers for one of the inputs, I don't remember which one, and 25 kilometers for the other. And these are people who have no form of transportation. So, I think that really paints the picture of what it's like. You're in these really poor communities, over these dirt roads with these huge potholes, and they have no transportation. And if they need, fertilizer or pesticides, how are they going to get that, right? So it's a really, really difficult life.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And it's the vicious cycle, right? Is like a national spraying program was started back in the mid 2000s to spray, and the goal was to spray all farms, which 3 times a season, which was considered the ideal number of sprays. And it never really reached the whole of Ghana, far from it, but it kind of instituted this idea of, routinized spraying of pesticides. And like Lauren was saying, it's really hard. And it's since that time, the government, Ghana Cocoa Board, has really drastically cut back on its provision of inputs, and now farmers are expected to pay for them. They still can get them gifted at times, but it's really it's we're seeing the impacts of this on the environment. I'm working with a number of organic cocoa farming endeavors in the eastern region of Ghana. Organic is very uncommon in West Africa, but we're now starting to see some of that because cocoa farms themselves are seeing the impact of this almost random spraying of pesticides when they can get their hands on them. It has had some pretty devastating environmental impacts, but I think we are seeing some shift now to organic methods and hopefully a lessening of reliance. But it makes life very, very difficult for the farmers, because if your choices are spray with a pesticide or lose your crop, obviously you're going to choose spray with pesticide. So it's very, very challenging.
Well, it was interesting because at the end we asked Abdul Razak what he wanted to tell us, and he said, well, what would be really great for us farmers if some governments or NGOs could start a fund so they could help pay for these inputs. So that kind of tells you, how hard it is.
Mm.
And so then they took us out behind their house to show us some trees, and so they're cracking pods open. One of these is a video. There's Abdul Razak. Here we go. I don't think you should. So they were just demonstrating fermentation to us, and like Kristy was saying earlier, you'll see they've cut like plantain leaves. They're putting them in this tin, but they were kind of also gonna put them into those plantain leaves for the fermentation. So there we are. I don't know. I had a lot of fun getting in photos with them. It was really great. I think we were all having such a good time. At least I was having a great time. I felt so grateful to them.
I had a fantastic day. I mean, I think they did too. It was just it was a truly joyful day, I think, for everyone.
It really was. And this is at the end, we brought them gifts, and thank goodness Kristy was with me, because she said, okay, we need to go shopping for gifts. And we brought them cooking oil and rice, and then chocolate bars, which we'll talk about in a sec. But one of the interesting things was, as we were driving to Asarekwa, Kristy was asking our driver, Abraham, who worked for CARE, like, what would be good gifts? Because I think you will usually bring cooking oil and rice. And Abraham came up with some really interesting ones. I mean, he said there's those are all female gifts, he said, because they're used in the kitchen. So he said, for men, it would be good to bring cutlasses, which are like the machete-like things that they're using to cut the pods. For women, sanitary napkins. So, I mean, things that for them are, for us are necessity, for them are complete luxuries. Bringing that type of thing would make a good gift.
Yeah, cutlasses are hard. At CIG, we're doing a cutlass donation drive right now. We're trying to get 200 new cutlasses for a group of villages in Eastern region, because that is really their tool. That is their farming tool. It's like, for me, my main tool of work is my computer. It's like, that's what I need, for cocoa farmers or any farmer in Ghana. Your main tool is a cutlass, which maybe you wouldn't know it as a machete. I mean, without a cutlass, you cannot farm. And so, yeah, and it's really, they have very specific needs for items that are sometimes very, very difficult for them to get.
And this just gives you a sense, these were their houses and their community. So now we're walking back to the main community where we'd met the elders. Again, just some shots. Oh, I took a picture of this because there was some kind of fungus that they called out that was attacking lots of different trees. And I couldn't really tell, but I got the sense, Kristy, they said it was also attacking the cacao trees. I thought that's what they said.
I think this might be mistletoe, but I'm not entirely sure. There are so many different pests and fungi and diseases nowadays, even some that farmers don't have any names for. But if I remember correctly, you and I saw mistletoe that day. I might be totally wrong about that. And there may be someone who's able to identify the cocoa diseases more readily than me. I don't see Bill Fredericks on. I thought he was going to join us. He might have some knowledge about um, of cocoa diseases that I don't know. If he is here, maybe he'll chime in.
And so then we went back and we now met with the village elders. And it was funny because when we had been buying gifts, Kristy had said, and we'll bring chocolate for the children. But we got there and the adults all wanted the chocolate. So he gave the adults the chocolate. Do you want to talk about, and so remember, Kristy was saying, I mean, Ghana is the second largest producer of bulk market commodity cacao in the world, but they don't really have much in the way of chocolate that's produced in country, because for those of you who are newer to this, the value added production happens out of the country. And that's one of the biggest problems. So when you see a lot of the press articles about West African cocoa, I mean, the cocoa is being taken out of the country as a commodity, or if it's being processed in the country, the dollars are being repatriated by companies in Europe or the US. But so they don't have bars like this in Ghana, right? They're starting to, and we're going to taste one towards the end. But what the farmers have is a local delicacy called King's Bite. Do you want to talk about the Aquafo bar that we gave them?
Yeah, so in Tree is the lingua franca of Ghana, and there was some talk in the chat about languages spoken, and English is the official language. It's the national language of Ghana as a former British colony, but the lingua franca that everybody speaks and you can always get by in is Tree. TWI. And so the tree word for farmer is aquafo. And so the aquafo bar is what we brought with us that day. And it's lemon flavored. I have sampled the aquafo bar out to many people, both in Ghana and outside of Ghana. And people have a love-hate relationship with it. They either love it or hate it. So it depends on if you enjoy the taste of lemon in your chocolate, but it's very, very popular in Ghana. And I'll just say a few words about chocolate in Ghana, or really, I think this applies across West Africa. A lot of my work, my research and my writing and my public speaking, I work really hard to dispel the myths and the stereotypes that we have about African cocoa farmers and the sensationalist stories that we tend to hear. And one of the things that I certainly tend to read and hear over and over and over again is that cocoa farmers in West Africa have no idea what chocolate is. They've never heard of it before. They've never tasted it, and on and on. And I think that's a sensationalist story that's told to kind of reinforce this idea that all cocoa farmers are like very much suffering and exploited. And while they do suffer, there's no doubt about it, they don't live on the moon, like they know what chocolate is. They even may have bought chocolate for themselves. Everybody understands that their cocoa ends up as chocolate. They may not think that much about it, but if you ask them, they will tell you that that's what happens to their beans. And I think the reasons why farmers don't eat chocolate every single day have to do with, accessibility and affordability for sure. It's very difficult, obviously, to retail chocolate in an environment where there's no cold chain. It's unaffordable. There's not a lot of disposable income in farming communities, and certainly not a lot of cash. But it's also not super big priority culinarily. There's not a big sweets culture in Ghana. People do enjoy sweets, but chocolate is not a priority food. And so if you hear people saying that there's cocoa farmers never heard of chocolate before, it's not my experience. In my experience, they certainly know what chocolate is, and they're very grateful and excited when we bring chocolate, as Lauren and I, or myself as a researcher. It's a moment of joy for them, but they certainly may have had prior experiences with chocolate for sure.
Oops. So then they gifted us coconuts. So that was really fun. So here we are drinking our coconuts with the CARE team. That was the team from CARE. And then the children were getting out of school. And so I said to Kristy, let's get them in a photo. And she said to me, they're all going to come running over here. And I was like, I know, that's the idea. So here they were all kind of like, on the outskirts watching us, like, who are these people? But we got them in a photo. So that was really fun. There were a couple of shy ones who stayed on the side, but most of them came over, and you can see one of the CARE volunteers holding a small one up in the back to make sure he was in the photo. So it was great fun. I always thought it was interesting because they're all holding up V's, which if you watch any like Netflix, which I do, admittedly, I watch Korean shows on Netflix. A lot of them will be doing this in photos. And I looked it up online, and it has something dates back to like the 1950s or 60s around a V for victory symbol, and they'll all do it. So it was fascinating because we went to take photos and all the kids started going like this. So I was like, okay, either there have been Asians coming through here, and we did see some buses with like Korean writing on them, and I know the Chinese are here pretty significantly, or somebody in the village must have a satellite dish because they all started doing this as soon as they saw the camera. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this was them drying the cocoa. So here they are drying their laundry, drying the cocoa at the same time. Another interesting moment.
Drying racks, I mean, they're exactly that, right? Like I've seen people drying all kind of things, and they dry cocoa and they dry clothes and they dry all sorts of other things just as well. Right? So they're multi-purpose tools.
And then this was the second family we met with. We didn't have that much time with them. I think we spent so much time with Abdul Razak because he was just, as Kristy said, fascinating, like smart businessman, like just really, really engaging, so interesting, that we ended up not having a lot of time to spend with this family. But the kids had gotten out of school, so I think all the kids from the village were now crowded around. This house was more in the center of the community, whereas Abdul Razak's was out in another community. There were only a couple of houses there. Here was like the center of the community, so like everybody was standing around watching us at this point. And then here we are heading back. So just to give a sense again of what it's like driving through towns in Ghana, this is still outside of Accra. And of course, I had to throw in the beauty shot of the cocoa pod that I took. So let's try the next chocolate bar, shall we? Now we're going to do the milk chocolate by Solstice. Solstice is a chocolate maker in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And I know, Kristy, this is one of your favorite bars, if I'm correct. So maybe if you want to say a few words about it. And everybody now knows how to taste chocolate. So use your 5 senses and do what I told you to do before. And I'll let Kristy talk about her favorite bar. And I'll make sure you have time to taste it too.
Yes, I'm so excited for this bar because the first and only time I tasted this bar by Solstice was there was a buyer trip to Tanzania. If you have been following any of the craft chocolate developments in recent years, you might have heard of a cocoa buying company called Coco Camili in Tanzania, who've done some really excellent work, and they had organized a trip for some artisan chocolate makers a couple of years ago, and I also went. And Deanne Wallen, who's the chocolate maker behind Solstice, was on the trip, and so all of the chocolate makers brought bars with them. And there was this one evening where we all sat around tasting everyone's bars, and we all tasted this bar that Deanne had brought with her, and were just like completely blown away. The primary flavor note that I get from this bar and many other Ghana bars is coconut. And so when we were, sorry, I put the chocolate in my mouth before I was finished speaking, because I was so excited. When we were sitting with Deanne, we were like, is there coconut in this bar? Because it's so coconutty. And she said, no. And I know it says on the ingredients, it may contain coconut, but it is really very common for Ghana cocoa beans from the main crop to have this predominant coconut flavor. Maybe you get it, maybe you don't. It doesn't say anything if you're not tasting coconut, but it's something that I really appreciate about this bar.
Well, I'll let you taste for a second, but we do have a lot of good questions coming.
Yeah, I was also looking at that. I like that suggestion from Kathy Wakefield. Why don't you change the descriptor for African beans from bulk or commodity beans to true chocolate flavor beans? I'm with you 100%, and that is a petition that I would sign any day, because I think the words bulk and commodity, while they're in some ways like neutral descriptors of that type of trade, they have come to signify lesser quality. There's been an immediate association of bulk or commodity cocoa with lesser quality, probably because the other main category is called fine flavor or specialty. And so if you're like, well, that one is fine flavor, this one must be not fine flavor, that's not necessarily true. And it's just the way these words have been kind of used that I think we have now this idea that all bulk or commodity beans are poor quality. And it's certainly not my experience in Ghana or in other parts of West Africa. So yeah, I'm all for it. True chocolate flavor beans.
Well, let me just also say that this is called a dark milk chocolate. It is a 54%. So as milk chocolate goes, it's a pretty high percentage. I did learn something interesting recently, and Kristy, maybe you already knew this, but a lot of craft chocolate makers will make dark milk chocolate bars. And I always thought, oh, it's marketing because they're pointing out that, yes, we may be adding milk to this bar of chocolate, but it's not as sweet. It may be some of that, but it turns out that the FDA standard for what you can call milk chocolate has to have 12% milk fat in it. And so I'm guessing most of these guys are not putting 12% milk fat in here. Therefore, they technically can't call it milk chocolate. So they're calling it dark milk chocolate. Always kind of interesting when something that is less adulterated can't meet the standard, right? And then just a comment on what Kristy was saying, where it says may contain coconut. The reason it says that is the FDA also has very strict labeling guidelines around allergens. And and maybe it does contain coconut, but it probably is if a chocolate maker is sharing molds or equipment with other products that they're making that might have coconut in them, they have to put something like that on the label. So that may be why that says that, although it would normally say may contain traces of coconut. So I'm not sure why she worded it that way if it doesn't contain coconut.
This particular tasting, I'm personally getting like a huge marshmallow from this one. And it could be the temperature, in the room where I'm sitting or the bar or what I ate before today. But this evening, I'm getting like big marshmallow from this.
Yeah, I'm definitely not getting that coconut note. I was getting more cheesy and maybe graham crackers.
Yeah, graham cracker also, kind of undertone of graham cracker. It's so delicious. I've actually had to reseal it because otherwise I will eat the whole entire bar.
So we have a few more questions, all excellent and all very big topics, but maybe we can, at least not have a nod to them. So Tracy Hamilton is asking, what efforts, if any, is the government doing to encourage the chocolate industry within the borders of Ghana now that the government has announced that it will end selling raw materials to trade partners like Switzerland? That's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, I could speak for like several days on this excellent question because it's really big, but I'll do my best to do brief. That article that you may have seen circulating was actually from 2020, where the president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, did make a statement on a visit to Switzerland that he would, stop sending cocoa beans to Switzerland. And I don't know what's another country like Switzerland. I mean, they're all sort of similar, I suppose, in Europe in their imports of cocoa. My understanding of it, that article was in heavy recirculation this year, is that really that was it was a political statement. I have seen no indication at all that Ghana is going to stop trading with European countries or North America. What has happened is at the national level, there is, and has been for a long time, promotion of domestic processing. Ghana does process quite a bit of its cocoa domestically, but not to chocolate, and not necessarily Ghanaian-owned companies. It may be foreign-owned companies who process cocoa into butter, liquor, or powder in the free zone. So in the free zone has a different tax relationship with the national government. It's treated as almost as if the cocoa has already been exported. And so there's not a lot of like fiscal feedback into the Ghanaian system. So it's not a robust method for development historically, but it does allow Ghana to say that X percentage of its cocoa is processed domestically. And certainly the government has been pushing for that. That is true on the industrial scale, less true on the artisan scale. The government while it says nationally, it is happy for more value addition to happen in the country, does not make things easy at all for the artisans. So it's really a mixed bag. But again, that story was a piece of sensationalism in my read of it. You know, both a sensationalist statement by Nana Akufo-Addo and also a kind of sensationalist printing of it in the way it was written in that article. But there's certainly no horizon that I see where Ghana is going to stop treating beans. Companion planting or intercropping, 100%. I have never seen a cocoa farm in Ghana or anywhere in West Africa that did not have plantain or cassava or yam or cocoa yam or other kinds of crops planted on them, some just for biomass. So the idea that cocoa is a monocrop, in my experience in West Africa, is not true. There has always something planted, and that's generally because farmers also need to eat. So they plant subsistence food crops.
So we have a few more questions, but let's keep going and then we'll come back. We'll save a little bit of time at the end. So I realize on the slide that is up right now, I made an egregious error. After I'd been in Ghana, I think for one day, and I kept referring to it as cacao, Kristy looked at me and said, Lauren, you're in Ghana, it's cocoa. As a former British colony, it is not Central and South America. So forgive me, I called it cacao.
It's totally fine.
But this brings us to one of those innovators that Kristy has mentioned in Ghana. This is Kim Addison of 57 Chocolates, and we're about to try one of her bars. And I think everybody got a different wrapper. They all come in different wrappers. So
yep.
It's all the same bar, lots of different pictures, so kind of fun. But she's in Accra, and she is one of the artisans that Kristy was talking about who's actually making chocolate. And I believe, didn't she and her sister grow up in Oklahoma, but their family's from Ghana originally?
Yeah, so they're a Ghanaian family, and Kim, I believe, was born in Oklahoma, Lauren, as you say, and Priscilla, her sister, I believe, was born in Europe somewhere. So they lived abroad for many years and worked in various roles. And when Kim's and Priscilla's parents were starting to think about retiring and moving back to Ghana, they kind of made an agreement with their daughters and said, when, we think you should start a business, why don't you think about being entrepreneurs? And when we move back to Ghana, we'd like for you to come with us and start a business there. And so Kim and Priscilla agreed, with their parents to do this. And then one day got a call, like, we're retiring, it's time. And so quit their jobs and that they had been working in and moved to the family home in Accra and opened up a chocolate factory. 1957 is the year of Ghana's independence from Britain, and the Ghanaian independence, which was led by Ghana's first post-colonial president and prime minister, Kwame Nkrumah, really was the spark that led to the independence of all sub-Saharan African countries. So Ghana was the first country in Africa to decolonize, to gain its independence. And so it's really was the pioneer in Africa of the independence movements. And Kwame Nkrumah was a great, Pan-African visionary. So everyone in Ghana would recognize, and you can see they put the little cocoa pod instead of the apostrophe, but in Ghana, 57 is instantly recognizable as, a phrase or numbers that signify like Ghana national pride. So that's a little bit about the name of the company.
And this was, we went to 57 Chocolates and did a chocolate tasting with Kim. So that was her presenting, and she had these Adinkra symbols, which, what are the Adinkra symbols, Kristy?
Yeah, so you can see some of them in the pictures. Kim and Priscilla also make little squares with an Adinkra symbol. They have molds of Adinkra symbols. And so Adinkra symbols, they're a cultural language, really, where the symbols have certain meanings, hope, or generally, often they're quite religious, having to do with God, faith in God, and strength in faith. There's a symbol for democracy. There's a symbol for adaptability, and Adinker symbols are woven into fabrics. They're used in batiks. They're fashioned out of metals. I mean, they're painted. Adinker symbols are everywhere. And if you kind of learned that symbolic language, then you can immediately see what meaning is being conveyed, through the symbolism on whatever object it's incorporated into. Very, very, very Ghanaian.
Getting ready to do our tasting with some cocoa tea as well. Oh, so let's try our last bar. And
Yes.
I'm gonna let Kristy, this is one of Kristy's favorites, I believe. I'm gonna let you talk about it. So
it is. And I'm very grateful to Lauren for including this bar, because I think it is unusual in the tastings. Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you usually are doing dark only.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not necessarily.
No.
It depends on the event. So, but mostly dark, yes.
Mostly dark. So this is the Moringa bar. And so as you can see, obviously it's green. So already a little bit unusual. If you're not doing the tasting, I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So Moringa is a plant. It's almost looks like a fern. I'm not sure if it's related to ferns, but it almost looks like one. And it's indigenous, if I'm not mistaken, to like the Indian subcontinent and parts of the Middle East and in that general world region. But it is very, very, very popular in Africa. It's grown in many parts of Africa, including Ghana. You can use every part of the moringa plant. You can use the bark, you can use the leaves, the roots, everything. It is considered to be very vitamin rich and high in antioxidants and have very many health benefits. So moringa is incorporated into everything, right? And so you will see moringa tea, you will see people cook moringa leaves, you will see moringa infused into just about any food you can think of. And Kim and Priscilla, I think, have done a masterful job of infusing moringa into white chocolate. So this is a white chocolate inclusion. And then they also just put spice on the package, but the primary spice in here is ginger. So this is my favorite bar that 57 Chocolate makes. And that's saying a lot because I love all their chocolate.
We're going to do an event with them in the fall. So we will be doing more bars with them in the fall. So stay tuned, everybody.
For me, I get almost like a matcha seaweedy type flavor, but like a warmth also from the ginger, which for me I find very pleasing. But very interested to know what other people think of the moringa.
For me, the ginger comes at the end, and we must have tried this when we did the tasting, but I don't remember.
We might have. I think it's relatively new for them, so we might not have.
Kathy's asking if the graininess is due to the moringa powder. Probably.
Yeah, I think so. Remember too that this bar traveled from Ghana to Seattle to you, and so.
Yeah, but it traveled in pristine condition.
Did it? Okay, good. No, good. I mean,
came to me, took like 4 days. DHL, they did a good job. So
no, they do. DHL does a great job, and Kim's got a really good relationship with them in Ghana. They know exactly what they're doing. But any voyage of that duration, I mean, it's like jet lag. The chocolate is maybe jet lagged, like me.
Well, Aaron Bartel is giving us a big thumbs up.
Oh, yay!
In the crowd, the chocolate botanist.
I like this a lot. I would say that the what was it, the bissap, the hibiscus and clove one, I like better, but this is delicious. Very matcha.
Yesterday, Aaron and I and Carl did a tasting of another 57 bar, which was called bissap, and that's the tree word for hibiscus. And so that bar is pink, and they do a different, like, it's almost like what I think of as like Christmas cake spices in that one. But the bissap, I mean, the moringa, I'm so happy that you like it. Aaron is really a flavor leader in this industry with his flavor inclusions at Intrigued Chocolate. So your stamp of approval means a lot.
Edward is saying he thought the spiciness was cayenne at first before it was revealed to be ginger. All right, so let's just finish up here and then we'll open it up for more questions, and we still have one that we'll need to answer. So Kristy, I know you would like to do maybe a COVID update of how has COVID affected things here, although I would like to tell the story. I was talking to Kristy, let's see, the first time you came back to the US when COVID was raging, you went home to New York and you flew from Accra to JFK, and you said to me, yeah, I got to JFK and the global, what's it called that you go through, the
global entry.
You just like, I flashed my passport and you let me in, and you went back to Ghana and they like took a COVID test, gave you an app, made you look at the app in 4 hours and like tested you when you came back into the country.
Yep, it's night and day. Like, I've been back to the US 3 times now since our borders opened in Ghana in last September. And every time they have waved me through at JFK, they're just like, welcome. And that's it. In Ghana, not the same story at all. Like, Ghana has been incredible at its COVID protocols. At the airport, everyone is tested immediately upon arrival. The first thing they do after you step off the plane is they shove a Q-tip up your nose and you take a rapid COVID test. And that's after presenting a COVID test before boarding the flight within 72 hours. You have to have had that test done. And then if you're negative on both, then you're allowed to proceed without quarantine. And so, so super fast, so efficient. I'm through that airport literally in like 30 minutes, including the COVID test result. It's quite extraordinary what they've done. Not cheap, but it's they're getting the job done. Since last year, I mean, I think now coming back here to Seattle, seeing the impact of COVID here has been a real eye opener for me, because we've been relatively mildly touched by COVID in Ghana. We had 3 weeks of lockdown in Accra in March of last year, I think a little bit into April, and that was it. Then lockdown was lifted. And of course we have social distancing and mask requirements like everywhere else, but and the president was very, very good at, sometimes it was almost weekly updates, giving us status updates about the numbers of infections in the country, what his plans were. They managed it all, in my view, excellently, with great leadership and role modeling. And, there's variable compliance like anywhere, but, for many complex reasons that I would never pretend to understand, we never really had the kind of devastation that we've seen in other parts of the world. And so I was able to go back to some semblance of regular life pretty soon. So I conducted a big research project last year for Divine Chocolate, and this was part of my research. I went into the field primarily in August and September last year. So by then things were opened up enough for me to feel very comfortable traveling domestically. I flew domestically. I went into the bush. You can see all of the farmers I'm meeting with are wearing masks. I always wear my mask. There were hand washing stations everywhere. It was really, really well done. And so, yeah, I've just kind of gotten on with it. And we've been very, very, very fortunate in the way in COVID impact. I just included this because I just think they're kind of fun. Like I normally would not bring my laptop into the bush because it creates a barrier between me and the farmer. So if I'm doing like an I'm a Cocoa Farmer series, I do not bring my laptop, but I had a very intensive research schedule with many, many, many focus groups that I was running. And it was just the fastest way for me to capture a lot of data in a way that I felt comfortable with. And so you can see this was from my research project last year, where I'm sitting there with my 2 members of my research team doing one of many, many focus groups and typing away. And, lots of things have improved in the rural areas. The roads have improved since I first started, living in West Africa. My first time living in West Africa was 1999. And I mean, things have improved, but I really enjoyed these 2 pictures because occasionally you come across something that's very interesting, like this plank bridge. My research assistant, Benjamin, who's in the middle picture with me, we opted to get out of my car and walk across this plank bridge. And leave poor Stanley to drive across it himself, but Stanley was very confident and he did not have any hesitation about driving right across those very wobbly planks, and I think found it all rather enjoyable. So like certain things have changed in the bush and certain things remain ever the same, but certainly COVID has not stopped me from doing any of my normal research activities since, I would say, July or August of last year.
That's great, thank you. So Kathy Wakefield wanted to know, for 57 chocolates, I'm not suggesting you'll necessarily know the answer to this, but we can speculate. Where do they get their cocoa butter, and is it deodorized? It's hard to tell if it's deodorized. But
I don't know if it's deodorized, but there's really only one source for cocoa butter in Ghana, or two maybe. CPC, the cocoa processing company, which is a government operated company, the makers of King's Bite, that the bar that, and the Quaffle bar that we were talking about before. So they would buy their cocoa butter from there. None of the artisans have a cocoa butter press. And the big industrial, there's many, domestic processors, but they're not usually interested in selling like a few pounds of cocoa butter, to an artisan maker. So really everyone just gets from CPC.
yeah, and just for those who aren't familiar, cocoa butter could be deodorized or non-deodorized. So if you get cocoa butter and it has no scent, which a lot of white chocolate is made with deodorized cocoa butter, it's very confectionery. It's a fat, you're adding sugar to it, you're making white chocolate. Some white chocolates are made with non-deodorized cocoa butter, and I always find them much more interesting because they still have the chocolatey flavor in them. So to me, it's often like a milk chocolatey kind of flavor to it. So, but most of the white chocolate you find on the market is probably deodorized. Edward's asking a follow-up to his companion planting question.
So I was curious about it from more of an environmental standpoint, like planting crops on an understory that are nitrogen binding crops to help reduce their need for fertilizers, and also planting the trees, the cocoa trees, underneath a higher forest canopy that will then reduce needs for irrigation.
Yeah, those are really great questions. So the current guidance from Cocoa Board is every seedling of cocoa planted is planted with a seedling of plantain. And so that's to provide shade and protection for the baby cocoa tree. And so you won't find any farmers now planting cocoa without a companion plantain plant. They're always going together. And then the plantain grows very quickly, much more quickly than the cocoa tree. And so it provides that shade during the critical, first, 2 or 3 years to the cocoa tree. And then the cocoa sort of doesn't need its help as much. But there are typically shade trees. I have not seen very much clear cutting, although there is clear cutting, it does exist, but most farmland does have some kind of shade. It depends on what part of the country you're in. It might be more or less. So some of those trees are already there. I mean, remember, this area was like thickly forested, and so a lot of that does remain. You don't see farmers planting too much like biomass. They're not planting trees, necessarily for canopy. Those, if they already exist, great. You really see it's really the intercropping is for food crops. And so, because that's their most pressing need. And, I don't know enough about like the nitrogen fixing properties of food crops. I think there are some beans, some legumes that are really strong at that. But you don't necessarily see farmers planting those. They plant their priority food crops, which are the tubers, cocoa yam and cassava and other things in that family. So it's a mix. There are some demo farms now that are really, really focused on biodiversity and trying to push the best practices, in a, I don't know, just a much more vibrant direction where there will be that diversity of planting for reasons other than subsistence foods, but it will take a very long time before that catches on. That's a great question.
So Brendan has a few questions, and we are going to have to wrap up in just a minute, but let's see, maybe we can go through these in somewhat rapid fire. How big-ish is the average farm? How long does it take a tree to be productive, and how long is it productive? And then I'll come back to his last question, which is a little bit longer.
Yeah, average. I mean, I don't know that there's an average number that was accurate really, because there's always a range, but you know, a few acres might be on the small side, and I don't know, some hectares on the larger side. It's really hard to say what the average is, but cocoa farmers are smallholders. You know, you kind of get a sense from the word smallholder itself that we're not talking about large land holdings here. You know, they may have a handful of acres, and in many of the cultural groups in Ghana, the land is divided with inheritance, and so you end up with smaller and smaller and smaller plots. So there's quite a big range. Your other question, how long does it take a tree to be productive and how long is it productive? That is got a very different answer today than it would have had, you know, even a few years ago, because the older varieties of trees may grow forever, you know, and continue to produce cocoa for many decades. The new hybrids, and those trees would have taken, let's say, 4 to 5 years before they would be commercially viable and producing, you know, cocoa pods to sell. Now, the new hybrids are, which are developed under, you know, auspices of Ghana Cocoa Board and tightly controlled by them, they are maturing very, very quickly. Farmers can see pods in as soon as 18 months. Sometimes it's more like 2 years, but really, really fast. And how long do they stay productive? The answer to that is nobody really knows yet. In areas where there's been really intensive hybrid planting, I've heard farmers complain about trees just not lasting very long, but it's very challenging to see how a tree that matures that quickly and is very productive from a very young age could have the longevity of the older varieties. So it's a question that remains to be answered, but I don't have a lot of hope, you know, around the long term. Farmers will have to cut down the trees and replant in much faster cycles than they ever did before.
Okay, and one last question, and I think we're going to end it. Oh, and we did have somebody asked, Sarah Wagner asked if I might lead a chocolate community trip to Ghana one day. So I would say yes. Kristy and I could do that. That would be fun. But I thought this was another good one from Brennan. How are the bean prices set, the commodity board or the open market? And I think that's a really unique answer for Ghana.
Yeah, it is. It is. Ghana does have a unique answer for that. So with the benchmark of the world market price, Ghana Cocoa Board fixes the producer price every season. And so what that means is a percentage of the world market price, which I'm taking out some complications here, but say roughly 70% of the world market price is the price that is paid to farmers. And that 30% goes to funding all of the activities of Ghana Cocoa Board. It's a tax that's, you know, spent within the industry, more or less. And that 70% then is paid, is a fixed price. Ghana Cocoa Board sets the producer price at the start of every season in late September or early October. And it is a pan-seasonal price, which means it stays the same for the whole season. And it's a national price, which means no matter where you are in the country, you get that price. And farmers do get it. I mean, there's obviously issues of weighing corruption where people will not pay for the full amount of the weight of cocoa that farmers bring to a buyer. That's endemic in the industry. Ghana is certainly no exception to that, but there is, you know, in my own research experience, Ghana probably has the best price control, in that, like, farmers know what price they're supposed to get and they do receive it. It is very, very, very little bit of like black market trading of cocoa in Ghana. It's all licensed, it's all legal. And the farmers have a high level of information around price. Even if we compare to Ivory Coast is just nothing. It's chaos compared to Ghana. So Ghana Cocoa Board does a really good job with that.
Well, thank you so much, Kristy. And thank you everybody for joining us. You know, I think I said when I started, when Kristy and I first met, it was like a treat to myself to have her come speak. I always find, you know, what she has to say so incredibly fascinating and interesting. And just knowing that she's now back in Ghana and being able to have an impact and with the Cocopreneurship Institute and, you know, continue her research, but also have that impact is just great. And I'm hoping to get back there while she's still there. But
You're always welcome. Always welcome.
Oh.
You are all always welcome.
All right, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. And, you know, stay tuned for other events. So as I said, we're going to have a few in the fall that are Africa focused with chocolate makers in Africa, and we'll have chocolate with that. So we have one of free tour coming up. It's a virtual tour of a cacao farm in the Dominican Republic on June 8th. It's lunchtime in the Pacific. But do check out our website and join us. So have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren. That was fantastic. Thank you for all the questions and all the engagement. Thanks very much.